Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Wherever you are when you are watching this, we know that wherever you are, the Lord is, and we know it's good. So welcome to Real Talk for Real Life. I am the co-host of Real Talk for Real Life, Brian Martin, and April Michelle has given me the reins for the show today. So I got to make sure I do this right. So we're privileged to have this opportunity to really talk about a subject that I believe is very timely for this moment in human history. And so I have with me a dear brother of mine, Brother Paul Austin. This gentleman is an amazing man who I think it's really great that we're having this time together because we're both exploring what manhood means under the shadow of the Almighty's wing. So today, we're going to be talking from a very simple subject, boys to men. Not the music group from the 90s, but more just the idea, of this progress, right? This idea of moving from stage to stage in our lives, taking full advantage of the resources that our Father has given us and moving forward from there. So, Paul, thank you so much for being a part of this. And just so our viewers and listeners have an idea of the relationship. You and Michelle go to the same church in Brooklyn, New York, Beulah Tabernacle Church, of which I was a member before either of you were members. So it's really interesting how the Lord has brought this together. And you are an instrumental part of the ministry there in Brooklyn. And I think it's great that Michelle has brought us together so that we can discuss this idea of boys to men. So is there anything you want to say before we jump right into this subject?
Hi. No, God bless you, everybody. I just want to first thank the Lord for this opportunity. It's a subject that's the topic that's, as you mentioned before, needed, for a long time because, we don't often dive into what men really need from a Christian standpoint. Yes, from a worldly standpoint, from a bravado standpoint, but from a true godly perspective, that's something that we really need to explore. And I'm glad we're doing this today. I also want to thank April Michelle. She's been a dear friend to me. We've been friends for over 22 years now, I believe. And she's just a wonderful sister and a wonderful friend. And listen, thank God to you, my brother. I love you much, man. And you are a great man. I see what God is doing with you, in you, and it's truly remarkable. Hearing your testimony and seeing where you are now, and I'm excited on what's to come.
Well, you've just blown up my head, so I'm going to have to get that, swelling taken down by a medical professional. So I appreciate those kind words. But you know what? I really want to take a moment really to get or give an opportunity for those who are watching, those who are listening, whatever, however they're getting this information, to really take a moment to learn a little bit more about us. And so, Paul, you are a chef.
Yes.
And you have been chefing it up for quite some time. And you're making moves. You're looking to expand because you feel that our Father has definitely written expansion into your life. And in the same vein, I'm moving forward with my public speaking career, with my empowerment coaching career, and whatever else it is that our Father wants me to do through his power. So we're both, moving forward in what it is that our Father wants us to have. And that's why I think that this topic is so important, because in conversations that you and I have had offline, we've spoken about the challenges of being a man and then why we may not have been eager to move from one stage of life to another. And we really examined that. And I think that that's what leads us to have a really great conversation today. So let's talk about that. So you have been a chef now for how long?
I've been in the industry for about 30 years now.
30 years.
30 years, starting from McDonald's, flipping burgers, to my time in about 5 years in the military as a cook there, to working corporate dining, working a restaurant here or there, doing catering, to now where I actually have my own catering company, The Missing Ingredient. And stay tuned for details after I give you details on how to contact me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another great thing is Paul has actually agreed to be on my show, Nearing the Next Step, which is a show that really explores what taking those next steps entails for an individual, but we can also extrapolate from that. And for those of you who are wondering, how do I take my next step? That show is definitely geared towards showing people as they're taking the step, or taking their next step rather. So we're not interviewing Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, people who have made it. We're interviewing and talking with people who are making it happen. And so thank you, Paul, for agreeing to be on that show. So all you who are listening, all you are watching, feel free to look in and get more details about the upcoming show, because it's definitely going to be one that will be fulfilling for a lot of people to hear. But with that being said, I think this is a great way that we can segue, Paul, into this idea of boys to men. So in your mind, Paul, what does it mean to be a man?
I mean, there are a lot of answers to that, but just for me, somebody who's responsible. Well, first, as a Christian man, somebody who can submit themselves to God. A lot of times, we want to be the lead, we want to be the head, we want to tell people what to do, where to go, how to think, what to say, but we don't want to take any advice. And to truly be submissive to God, that's a humbling thing. And it's hard for men to be humble. But if you can be humble to God and allow God to do what He wants in you, that is, for me, the mark of a man. If I can listen to God and I take God's direction, or if I listen to God rather, and I take God's direction and I do what He says, I mean, there's nothing I can't do. There's no place I can't go. There's no person I can't reach, but it's being humble.
And that's an interesting perspective, because while I agree with you wholeheartedly, when we had our other conversations, we spoke about the fact that both of us, right, and countless other men have struggled with this idea of truly being a man. And that doesn't mean that we're not performing our jobs. It doesn't mean that we're not, showing up for events and doing the things that are expected of us, but we know there's more. And I really want to dive into this and start with this statement that the ultimate man, and I really want to talk about this, right? The ultimate man is Jesus Christ. And there's a lot of people that would disagree with that for whatever number of reasons. But on this podcast, we're starting from the foundation that Jesus is that perfect guy, right? Like, I know we think of Jesus as the ideal man, but what we're saying is He's the perfect guy. So Paul and I, as Christians, we are seeking to emulate what it is that Christ is, and then to, of course, allow our Father to empower us to do what we're supposed to do through His power. And so Jesus is the man. And a lot of times we don't think of Him as the man, because a lot of what He did was shrouded in the language of the King James Version. Mm-hmm. And so we don't see a lot of parallels between His life and ours. So throughout this show, we're going to be constantly talking about stories from the Bible, but we're going to really draw a lot of inspiration from Jesus Christ and the idea that He showed us the way we are supposed to live. So Paul, you talked about being a man, being responsible, taking care of business, doing what has to be done. Why are we finding it so difficult to actually be the men that our Father wants us to be?
If you look at what's happening today in our society, as you know, from a biblical standpoint, we're living in the last days we are living in, the Laodicean period. We know Jesus Christ is coming back for a church without spot or wrinkle. And let's take the media, for example. There are a lot of negative influences coming through the media. And when it talks about manhood, it's a lot of bravado. It's a lot of sexual innuendo. You know, a man is somebody who can, like if you look at the rap game, for instance, a man is perceived as somebody who can get girls, have money, have cars, have jewelry, smoke weed, you know, and you know, it's a shame, you know, because there was a time where men were depicted through media as responsible fathers who took care of their home, took care of their families. And even if they didn't have families, you know, their own children, there was this a responsibility to their community, maybe to their church or to whatever organization. We're, you know, as I said, we're in a time now where men just want to do just whatever they want to do, even to go as far as even younger men now who don't feel that they have to listen to those who have been there, done that. Hey, I'm just going to do my own thing, you know, because this is what I feel. This is what I think. Going on emotion, then facts or things that have been proven. You know, we're not designed to be emotional beings. We're logical. We think, we want to think. We're thinkers and we're doers. You know, women have been designed to be more emotional, and it's not saying that disparagingly, that's just how God designs, but now we see the tables being turned, being flipped to where now women are the logical ones and the thinkers and the doers, and the men are more emotional. You know, and you know, we know that it being the last days, things are only going to get worse. But this forum is to prayerfully lead at least some to those who might be experiencing those things or dealing with those things, that we could prayerfully change your mind and you can go down the road and the way the Lord designed it to be.
Paul, you did a great job, honestly, of really breaking down this idea, right? Like that there has been a shift in the succeeding generations where what was once seen as almost gender specific roles, where the man was seen as the logical, rational individual, the female seen as the more feeling and emotional individual. And when we look at that, and of course, these are generalizations because of course there are a lot of women who are logical and rational, and there are a lot of men who are emotional and feeling. So I'm sorry. Didn't mean to cut you, but if I may add, you know, there's nothing wrong with men having emotions. There's nothing wrong because that's how God designed us. But we get captured, you know, we get really captured up in that now, to where we're thinking with our emotions more than thinking logically, or we're being governed more by our emotions now than thinking logically. Sorry to cut you, but I didn't mean to do that. Don't hurt. No, that's fine. No worries. But you bring up a great point, though, Paul. The idea, you know, oftentimes when I'm counseling individuals, what I say to them is you know, that emotions are meant to inform and not to instruct. And this idea is basically that, you know, if you are in a situation where somebody's trying to play you, right, then you feel angry or you feel agitated. Like those emotions are meant to alert you to your environment, but they're not supposed to dictate what your actions are going to be. Right. So again, when we look at Jesus, we know that he experienced the whole gamut of emotions, but he understood his mission. And that's the great thing that we can really take from his life, just as a historical example, the fact that even though he faced these enormous pressures and had a grand responsibility to fulfill, he processed emotion and he used that emotion in order to make the proper or take the proper steps. And so we see what it's supposed to look like in the life of Jesus. And I think you make a great point that men have kind of shifted. And now we have given far more prevalence to our emotions. And as a result, that has caused us really to step back from many of the roles that we are supposed to occupy in society. So we find ourselves at this crux in community, right? Like men are fathers, are pillars in the family. So you got your mother, you got your father. Those are the pillars. And then the family is the building block of the community. And so once we understand that there's all-out warfare against this family, then we begin to recognize that we really have to be purposeful about fulfilling our roles. So I think it's awesome that you bring that up and that that we dive into this idea of the proper place for emotions. And so I know in my own life, there have been moments when I've been very tempted to respond from an emotional place. And let's be real, I've fallen for that temptation many times.
You all have.
Right?
All have.
And it doesn't give us the results for which we're looking.
Right.
Sure, it may give us that immediate sense of release and relief, but then what we get afterward is regret and remorse. So we see then that there really has to be a purposeful approach in the way that we deal. And so as an empowerment coach myself, one of the things that I really want to make sure my clients and customers understand is that you have the power, right? If I could be so bold as to use an example from, Frank L. Baum's book, The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy had the shoes, but what she didn't have was the knowledge. She didn't have the understanding, and she lacked the wisdom of what the shoes represented and what she had the power to do. And so it's very important that as men, we understand that our power, though bequeathed to us by our Father who is in heaven, we still have to develop that power. In the same way that Michael Jordan is considered by many to be the greatest basketball player of all time, if he did not practice, his talent would have never gotten him to the exalted position that he holds today. And so we understand that even though we have been given a dimension or depth of gifting or talent or skill, our responsibility is to develop that, to grow that. And that means discipline. And discipline is, if you really think about it, the antithesis of acting from our feelings alone. Discipline is doing what needs to be done, even when it's not any fun. That's really the fundamental definition of discipline. And so there was a time in society, definitely during the time when society was more agricultural, when sons grew up in the shadows of their fathers. They learned beside their fathers. If the father was a cooper and he made barrels, the son more than likely grew up and he made barrels. If the father was a sawyer and he was responsible for cutting down trees and fashioning boards from them, the son probably grew up, to do that. And so there was this apprenticeship that was happening. Now today we don't see that happening, and I believe we see the effects of that. So now we talk about being a man. We talk about recognizing our responsibility. What stands in the way, Paul, of us being the men that our Father wants us to be? What are the obstacles?
One for sure is you have a lot of young men who don't have fathers. They didn't grow up with fathers. So the mother had to take on that role. Sometimes they didn't have both parents. So they're raised like baby by the grandparents, aunt and uncle. But let's stick to those who had just mothers in the home. Now the mother could only be a mother. And if you look at some of the old time grandmothers, even though they were hard and tough, there was still, and I meant not grandmothers, but old-time mothers, I should say. They were hard and tough, but they were still mothers. That boy needed a father figure. Now, thank God for those who have had maybe brothers or uncles. They stepped in and they were able to fill that gap and able to teach that boy into, and be there for that boy into manhood. But again, as we see today, and I'm sorry, I keep going back to this thing with media. And I'm gonna flip for a second. When you talk about television, I always say television is telling a lie to your vision. And we see, if you look at the show, Everybody Loves Raymond. Raymond, he's a wimp. He's a wimp. His mom is telling him what to do. His wife is pushing, and his wife pushes him around. His dad is like oblivious to everything. His brother is always like down in the dumps. You know, it's insane how men are depicted. And when you see these images over and over and over again, it develops you. It changes you. There was a time when you looked in a movie and you saw a man, he was a man. Rough, tough, rugged, didn't take no mess from nobody. You know, if you got up in his face, God help you. He's gonna let you have it. But when it came time to, you know, if he had a wife or a woman, he was tender and kind to her. His family, he took care of his children. He raised his children. He mentored his children. He taught his children right from wrong. But you don't see that today. You see the far opposite. A lot of us teach our children to chase skirts, to smoke weed, to cuss all the time, not to go to school, not to read, not to get engaged in church, not to engage in anything that's going to help build you spiritually, work-wise, even emotionally, the right way. Everything's chaotic. So there are a lot of factors into why we see what's happening today. But for me, that's like one of the main ones, this thing with media. And it's just gonna progressively get worse and worse and worse. But thank God there are godly men like you, godly men, and I'm not trying to puff myself, but because of my relationship and my belief in Jesus Christ. And there are a lot of men that we know between us that are great, strong role models for our young people. And it's hard to, and you know, we have issues with our young people listening to us, but that's because we don't listen to them. You gotta listen to the young people, our young men. You gotta listen to them because they go through and they deal and take on so much more than we ever did with everything that's going on. And if you listen to them and really step back and maybe even try to put yourself in their shoes, it's gonna balance out and we'll be able to reach them. I hope that answered at least part of your question, but I know I kind of veered off a little bit.
Not, I mean, and I think that's really what we're talking about here, is the idea that it's a multifaceted answer, that there's no quick answer and no easy solution to what we see happening in our society today. And, you know, as I'm listening to you, I'm almost hearing those who might be critical of your answer when you said, you know, when you used to look at the movies, a man was a man. And I want to ask you this question: how much of that image, you know, of in the movies back in the day, how much of that was toxic masculinity? How much of that was what we don't want to emulate versus what we do?
Right. So, and as you said, it's not one answer. But again, you had those images where, yeah, he was a strong man, but he was a womanizer. Where he was strong, but he was abusive. You know, so it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy thing to answer because there are so many things that have happened, so many things have gone on. But when you look at Jesus, he's a perfect example of a man. And just quite frankly, if we followed that example, we wouldn't have the issues, or these issues that we're having today. Because Jesus was loving, he was kind. When people did wrong, he stood up, but he gave them a straight answer. And even if it was harsh, at the end of it all, nobody could dispute that. They'd be mad, but they're mad because Jesus blew them up, rightfully so. So he is the ultimate, as you said in the beginning, he's the ultimate example of a man. But there have been instances where you've had men who are good role models, and they show that they are good role models. Unfortunately, now we're in a time where and in my opinion, it's almost non-existent media-wise. And we have people in our communities, in our churches, some on the job, in our families, who are great role models, who are excellent fathers, who are excellent teachers, who are excellent motivators, who are just excellent men. We know Deacon Horace Michael. He's his face should be, other than Christ, his face should be next to the word man.
Absolutely.
He exemplifies what a man is. And one of the things I love about him, he made a lot of mistakes, and we don't have to go through all that, but we don't have to mention them. But he can say, listen, I did this was wrong, and this is what I did to correct it. And now that I corrected, now I can move on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And, sometimes I get an opportunity to go and just talk with him over the phone, or go get to see him, safety distance, of course, because of what you're still going through. And just to sit and just listen to him, and just to take in everything he talks about. If I had to choose a man here on earth to emulate, he's the one I want to emulate. By far. Because this man is full of wisdom. He's full of knowledge. He took care of his family. He still takes care of them today. And he's just a wonderful man. A wonderful man to be with. So,
I got to tell this story about Deacon Michael. Right now, the listeners, the viewers, don't know this man.
Don't know this man.
I have to say,
mm-hmm.
I had the privilege of going over to Deacon Michael's house every Wednesday, I believe it was. We would count out the money from the offerings for church on Sunday and all that kind of stuff. And so I would just get to sit and listen and talk with this great man. And but this particular, I believe it was a Sunday, church was over. And if you know Deacon Michael, you know that, you can joke around with him, but you toe that line, you cross that line, and whatever is over that line is liable to get amputated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember this particular day. I know it was after service, and I don't know what I said, but we were standing at the coat rack at the rear of the sanctuary, and I don't even know what I said. I was probably joking around, but I'm sure I was joking around, but he must have taken it as disrespect, and he grabbed my collar, the collar of my shirt, and I knew at that moment that if he so wanted, right, like if he wanted to, I would be a memory, right? Like the power of this man was such that I recognized at that moment the awesome magnitude, and this is going to sound almost blasphemous, but the awesome magnitude of our Father whose address is in heaven. Because I understood at that moment what the fear of the Lord means, right? Because Deacon Michael could have snapped my neck, right? Is he going to snap my neck? No, but he could have, right? He demonstrated at that moment that he had absolute control in that moment. And it made me realize that our Father has that power to snuff us out at a moment's notice. But that's what the fear of the Lord is. The fear of the Lord is not that I'm afraid of God. It's merely that I'm aware of the magnitude of his power. And Deacon Michael, he, as you said, he embodies that. He is a man that is a man's man. He's a man who stands for what is right. And if he does what is wrong, he owns up to it and he makes it right. And we can learn so much from that example. And I think, for those who are listening, they probably, hear us talking about Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is this mythical figure to them, or someone whom we can never, really imitate the life of Jesus Christ. But what I want to do is I want to make him a little more personable for us, because a lot of us grew up in church, and sadly, we don't really have that personal relationship with Jesus. So I want to take a moment to really break down who Jesus is. And you'll notice that I always speak of Jesus in the present tense, because he is alive and well. Okay, he wants me to give you that word. He is alive and well. He just said, hey, right? Like, that's how alive and well he is, right? He's not speaking King James Version, how beest thou? He's like, hey, what's up, right? Like, how's everything going? You good? So, but the thing about Jesus is that in scripture, we see a man who dies. He literally bursts from the grave and says, all power is given to me in heaven and in earth. And he goes on this campaign for 40 days, right? Where he's, out and about, seen by upwards of 500 people at one time. There's no disputing that this man rose from the dead, right? And I'm sure he's showing off the scars in his hands and letting people feel his side. And no, I'm the real deal. I'm the guy that got crucified, a couple of weeks ago, right? And the interesting thing about Jesus is that when he rises from the dead, he goes to see his friends. But if you read the Gospels with fresh eyes, you notice that when the women went to his tomb, because they didn't believe what he said, right? Let's get that real. He said, 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the grave. They're going to dress his body, even though he said, I'm going to rise from the grave. So they expected to find a man who said, I'm going to rise from the grave, still in his grave. And so they get to the tomb. This angel says, basically, what are you doing here? Because he told you that he wasn't going to be here. And so they're like, oh, yeah, that's right. And so they turn around to leave. And Mary sees Jesus. And she supposes that he's the gardener. Now, let's really give this some thought, right? Because I really want to make Jesus like personal to everyone. She turns around, she sees this dude, she thinks he's the gardener. Now, if you've walked with somebody and followed after someone for 3+ years, like Paul, I know you, right? I'm not going to turn around, look at you and be like, oh, that guy must be the janitor. Like, dude, I know you. So clearly, the reason why Mary did not recognize who Jesus was is because he's disguising himself. Now, why would Jesus disguise himself from one of his followers? For the same reason that I might see Paul in Times Square, and I might pull my hat down a little further or bury myself in my coat a little deeper and just walk up to him and say something crazy just to see what his response is going to be.
And you would do that, but go ahead.
Was that you said?
You would do that.
I would absolutely
do that, but go ahead.
and it speaks to what? I'm not going to do that to a stranger. I'm going to do that to someone with whom I have a deep relationship. So Jesus was showing, I'm chilling. I'm having a good time. He walks with 2 disciples all the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, which I don't remember the exact distance, but they're walking. So this is a lot of time that he's talking with these people, and they're saying, and so here's the crazy thing about what Jesus does. He walks up to them. They have no idea who he is. And so he basically says, hey guys, why the long faces? Right? So they're like, what do you just crash land on earth? Dude, like our leader is dead and we don't know what to do anymore. The hope of Israel has been extinguished. And so Jesus is like, oh, really? What are you talking about? And they're like, you really did crash land here, didn't you? Like, dude, like Jesus of Nazareth, the prophet, the one that was doing all this stuff. They killed him there. And we believed in him. So Jesus says, oh, you foolish people. And then he literally, from like Genesis and the Pentateuch on through the prophets and the Psalms, he threads this line and talks about Christ. And he says, well, don't you know from scripture that it says that it behooved Christ, right, to suffer so that he might be glorified? And so he talks with them all this time. They finally make it to the destination that the disciples were going. Now watch this. Jesus acts like he's going to keep on going. So they're like, no, dude, the sun is setting. You got to come in. You got to come in. You can't keep walking. Stay here. And then tomorrow morning, just get up and go, right? This is Jesus, I'm telling you, right? And so Jesus is like, nah, I think I better kind of keep on making it. And they're like, no, we insist. You can't go. And he's like, all right, you talked me into it. They walk inside. They sit down to eat. And Jesus is like, you know what? Let me say the grace, right? Let me say the grace. And they're like, all right, you know what I'm saying? And so he says this grace. And as he's saying the grace, like they're getting, like they can feel something happening inside of them, right? They can probably barely keep their eyes closed listening to this dude just say this grace. And I'm sure it wasn't my traditional Thanksgiving Day grace, which takes about 13 minutes and turkey is called. I'm sure he's doing like, or, you know, he's doing his thing, but they he finishes and they know, like they look up to like, who is this man? And just as they recognize him, he disappears. And what I want to point out is this same Jesus that disguises himself from his friends, like we would do with our friends. The same Jesus who's walking on the water. His disciples are in the midst of a storm. Peter, an experienced fisherman, knows this is the storm that's going to kill us, fellas. He knows this is the one. And so Jesus is walking on the water and read it. It says he acted like he was going to walk right past them. First off, let's examine this for just a second. We're in the middle of a storm. The ship is going down. We're about to die, dude.
And you sleeping.
First, no, this is him on the water. This is him walking. And he's walking. First off, you're walking on the water. And then two, you act like you got somewhere that you got to be in a hurry, walking across the water in the middle of a storm. Before you do whatever you're doing, could you come and help us? So he acted as though he was going to walk right past his friends. Who does that? A friend's friend. And this is who our Father is. This is why Paul and I are saying that the ultimate man is Jesus. Because even though he was God wrapped in flesh, he still knew how to have a good time. And that's the life that he wants us to have. This is what being a man is all about. When we're men, we know that there's a time to laugh. We know there's a time to joke. We know there's a time to just engage in a little ribbing. We get that. But then there's a time to be on about our Father's business. There's a time when we are supposed to be, at attention. And Jesus exemplifies this. And when we allow that to be first and foremost in our lives, then we're at that place where we can be used by our Father. So all of that to say, Paul, that I think it's absolutely fitting that you would bring up Deacon Michael, that we would talk about who Jesus is, because who Jesus is who our Father expects us to be. And explain that, like, to me, right? Like, our Father wants us to fulfill his will the way Jesus fulfilled his will. Is that a huge responsibility? Is it an impossibility? What are your thoughts regarding that?
Well, it's really, it's not hard to do what the Lord says. It's just do it.
Just Nike. Just do it.
Just really, just honestly, just do it. Because like you'll get up to go to, if your boss says you have to be here at 9 o'clock in the morning, what are you doing? You live all the way out in Timbuktu. You taking a train, bus, car, walking, bike riding, crawling, whatever you got to do to get to work at 9 o'clock in the morning. If you want tickets to a baseball game, You're going to do everything you can to get to that baseball game. If you want a trip to LA, you're going to do everything you can to make sure you are ready and you are on that plane going to LA. So if you can do all of that for everything and everybody else, why can't we do it for God? And it just says, just be obedient to me. Now, do we know, does God always tell us every single I and T? No. That'll take the fun out of it. Does he always answer you right away? No. He just says, trust in me with all your heart, lean not to your own understanding, and all thy ways acknowledge me, and I'm going to direct your path. And if you know and we believe and we profess that he will never leave us, never forsake us, never lead us wrong, what's the problem? It's this, of flesh. We know, the devil is going around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But as saved, sanctified, Holy Ghost-filled men, we have the power to overcome that. And it's really that, and really, it really honestly is that simple. But because of sin, coupled with the fact that we want to do what we want to do, go where we want to go, say what we want to say, have what we want to have, you want money, you want fame, you want fortune, you want all this stuff. It gets in the way, clouds of judgment. You're listening to the wrong thing. Look at Adam. What did God tell Adam and Eve? Don't touch it. Don't even touch it. Don't eat of the tree. Don't even touch it. And that day you'll surely die. But he let this knucklehead come, Satan come and say, well, tell Eve, well, did God really say that? So he's just he doesn't want you to know what he knows. But you'll be just like him. When God said, the creator of the universe, the one that created you out of the dust of the earth, the one that breathed life into you, the one that created you, Adam, then put you to sleep, took a rib out of you, and created Eve so you can have a helpmeet because the animals weren't suitable enough for you. The one that created all the apples and peaches and fruits and flowers and all that stuff. Did you choose to listen to the enemy? You don't trust him? How does that work? If you broke it down like that to any logical person, without mentioning God, if that was just a person that did that, let's say, like, yeah, that person's crazy to allow that. It's about Jesus. And the funny thing is, this is boys to men. But at the end of the day, as we've been stating from the beginning, the ultimate man is Jesus. You want the picture of a perfect man? It's Jesus. You want to learn how to live as a man? It's Jesus. You want to learn how to walk like a man? It's Jesus. You want to learn how to talk like a man? It's Jesus. You want to learn how to handle problems and to handle people, especially when they get out of line? It's Jesus. You want to learn how to be tempered? It's Jesus. You want to learn how to be laid back and cool? It's Jesus. You want to learn how to have a good time? Guess what? It's Jesus. It's all or nothing with Jesus. You want to learn how to be like a man? It's Jesus.
Great words, Paul. And I really am grateful for that because it brings our first part of this podcast to a close, where we're really taking you to this point as listeners, as viewers, to pay close attention and investigate on your own. You'll find no greater man than Jesus Christ. And it is because he did something incredible. And when we come back with part 2, we're going to talk about Jesus's role as the second Adam and what that promises in our own lives today. We're going to get a little more personal with Paul's journey and my own, and our realization that we need to constantly be moving forward with our Father. So thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of Real Talk for Real Life. I'm Brian Martin, the co-host of the show on today, and we've got Paul, the awesome one Austin, with us on today. So make sure you tune back in for part 2.
I gotta get personal? Okay, I'll do it, no problem. Thank you, Brian. We'll see you in part 2.